Well, welcome back to That Was the Week That Was, week 15 of 2023. And once again, I am here to ask Vince McLeod of the Alternate Centre about the events of the week past. Hey, Vince, it's good to see you again.
Hey, Bob, it's great to see you as always. Looking forward to doing another show.
Awesome, great. Well, let's jump right in then. I would like to ask your opinion about the military maneuvers in the South China Sea. What has been happening this last week and where are we headed?
In the last week, we've seen a Chinese naval exercise that has been intended to blockade Taiwan. Apparently, it's a forebringer of what they intend to do in the case of full-scale invasion. So they blockaded Taiwan and they stopped certain vessels from passing through the Taiwan Strait. It's between Taiwan and China. But a United States Navy destroyer went through the blockade anyway. So there's a lot of conflict and tension in that particular area. Some have been saying that this opportunity just now was perhaps Chinese were going to invade. The truth is that if the Chinese were ever going to invade Taiwan, we'd know about it months in advance, just as we did in Russia invading Ukraine, because we'll be able to see from satellite reconnaissance the buildup of troops and war material. So there wasn't evidence. There wasn't evident in this particular case. So it was just an exercise. But at some point in the future, we can probably predict that China's going to do a naval exercise that ends up being an invasion.
So this was just about intimidation then, was it?
It's just about intimidation and testing the war readiness of the United States and Taiwan and Japan and other allies, just to see how they react to the Chinese blockade. And so they'll look at that, and the Chinese will look for any data they can find and see what weak points they can find. And so then they'll update their battle plan for the next potential exercise or possible invasion.
Wow, okay, we'll have to watch that. Right. From China to Russia, is it possible, Vince, that alcoholism could play a part in the defeat of the Russian army? Apparently there is historic precedent.
There's a lot of historic precedent for alcoholism affecting Russian war efforts. Goes all the way back to the Crimean War. You can see that the Russian army severely underperformed in Crimea because of alcoholism. You saw in the Russo-Japanese War of 1905, the Russian army again was very poor on account of alcoholism. Things weren't so bad in World War II because they had the authoritarianism of communism that prevented some things like this. But now that that's gone, they seem to have reverted to type, and it appears that many of the units of the Russian army today aren't as effective as people had thought they were because of widespread alcoholism among the troops.
So it's not looking good for Russia as the weeks go on.
It's looking worse and worse. I think it's since they didn't win already in the first 3 days, then they've been on the back foot since then. And they've discovered that the new waves of conscripts that they've brought in aren't as useful as they had expected on account of the alcoholism. What they haven't taken into account is that the average person doesn't really want to fight in Putin's war, and so morale is extremely low in the Russian army right now, and that's why alcoholism is so prevalent.
I'm going to swap over now to a completely different subject, a different side of the world, and maybe some good news. It appears that the measures taken by Biden and the Fed have actually worked.
Inflation has eased to 5% in the United States, but it remains to be seen if this is a permanent downturn or if inflation is going to spike again. People are still disagreed about the causes of the inflation in the first place. Those who believe that the money printing caused inflation expect to see that rate to go back up again from 5%. Those who believe that it was merely a structural and temporary thing are expecting to see that go back down. The Federal Reserve's target inflation band is still 3% or lower, so 5% is still considerably higher than that, which means that there's no real expectation that they're going to put interest rates down anytime soon. In fact, if inflation remained stubborn at 5%, we could even see a further increase of interest rates. But this is the first time that inflation has fallen to be within about the range of the interest rates in general. So what I think we can expect to see is the Federal Reserve, like the other reserve banks around the world, they'll just wait and see to see if this is a permanent fall in inflation or if it goes back up. And if things keep falling, then they'll keep interest rates the same. And if it goes back up, they'll think about raising them again. But 5%, it's still too high for there to be any real chance of a cut to interest rates like people are expecting. So I think the Federal Reserve's just going to wait and see, and so will the New Zealand Reserve Bank before making any further moves.
This is the first glimmer of hope that we have seen so far in 2023 of a slowdown, isn't it?
It really is. Inflation had just kept on going up and up, and there were fears that it could soon go into double digits in America, like it had done in Britain and Netherlands and some other places around the world. But I think the American economy is just too big. It's so big that it's hard to put momentum into it in the form of inflation, and so it will naturally tend to have low inflation. And I think their baseline level of inflation is probably quite low. So we could see that 5% fall further and further in coming months.
So good. Right, so we're going to come back to New Zealand. And people here are wondering if the Maori Party are going to be the ones ruling the country. The latest poll has showed that Labour and National are tied on 36%. So the Maoris may be dictating the terms after the next election.
It's looking extremely likely because Labour and Greens together seem to be always polling at about 57, 58 seats. And so they will need the Maori Party. They'll need the Maori Party's 3 or 4 seats in order to form a government. National and ACT sometimes poll 61 or above, which means they wouldn't need the Maori Party. But they often poll 60 or below, which means they would still need them. If National and ACT together score 59 seats and Labour and the Greens say 56, then both sides will need the Maori Party in order to govern. So in that case, they will be the kingmakers. They will have an incredible amount of power for the next 3 years. However, New Zealand First, in the most recent poll, New Zealand First scored 3.9%, and that's possibly high enough for many people to throw their votes towards them next time in the belief that they'll get over the 5%. So I think that the chances of New Zealand First getting over 5% and repeating 2017 are extremely high. If New Zealand First got in, then one of the two sides would no longer need the Maori Party in order to form the government. But it's possible that New Zealand First really doesn't want to go with Labour. Apparently, Winston Peters has already said that he doesn't want to go with Labour. So that'll bring the National and ACT Party back into play. But the Maori Party have also said that they don't want to work with National. So in either case, I think we're likely to see some really tricky negotiations after the election this year.
It's quite ironic from many different perspectives.
It's very ironic, and I think this is following the trend that we see in other European countries that also have mixed member proportional systems. Like in Holland, they regularly have 6 or 7 parties in parliament, and a similar situation in Denmark and Sweden. So I think that's likely to happen to us. I think there's a good chance we'll end up with 6 or even more parties in parliament this election, possibly even top. The Opportunities Party could get in, and possibly even Democracy NZ. So I think there's a good chance that, given the extent to which support for the establishment is collapsing, that we'll see several minor parties in Parliament after this year's election.
Right, Vince. Well, last week you commented that youth crime was out of control and that there seemed to be no way and no will to stop it. Last Thursday, a grandma in Cambridge ram raided a ram raider's car. And it just seems to me that maybe the people are realizing that nobody is coming to save them.
I think the New Zealand people have figured out that the so-called justice system is really there to protect the ruling class, and they couldn't really care less if the people in general suffer ram raids and robberies and other thefts. So people have been saying that on account of this, there was always the risk that vigilantism would rise in New Zealand, would go back to being like a lawless or like a pre-law state where communities had to take justice into their own hands. And that's obviously what happened in the case of this grandma. People have been saying that they've had a guts full of Ram Raiders and people should step in. I definitely don't condone doing that, because some of these Ram Raiders, they're not just soft people, they can be extremely desperate, dangerous. So I wouldn't recommend doing it. But despite that, I'm happy to see that this grandma did it and turned the tables on the Ram Raiders for once, gave them at least some kind of justice.
Yeah, ballsy lady.
Very ballsy. I think we need more like her, but I suspect that most people are happy to just look on for now. I think the problem is, as far as the alternative centre is concerned, is that the left and the right are extremely divided about what to do about this particular issue. The Labour Party just seems to be happy letting it drift on. They don't seem to be willing to take any serious measures to stop it. And the National Party have got their crazy ideas about boot camps. Luxon was in the news today going on about boot camps, and that's not going to really help the Ram Raiders either. So the alternative centre takes a much more long-term point of view when it comes to things like child crime. And really, we should stop things like this before it gets to the point where grandmothers have to ram raid cars.
Yeah, I'm with you on that, 100%. Yeah. Okay, well, Vince, that was the week that was.
Cheers, Bob, and cheers, Internet. And as usual, it was great to talk to you, and I'll see you again next week.
The Alt Centre are clown world's good guys. They don't fit into boxes neatly enough to be someone else's tools.